Let me turn it over to County Executive Eldridge.
So I want to introduce Marcus, and then I have a meeting with the superintendent and other people over there that was scheduled for 11, so I'm going to go over there, but you're interested in Marcus's answers, not mine. And,
Yes.
and I don't plan on being the police chief. So I just want to introduce you to Marcus and give you a little background on my decision. You know, Marcus brings more than 30 years of experience to this position, and he's an example of an officer who's risen through the ranks. His resume is strong. I think you've all had a chance to look at it, and he's done all kinds of jobs in the department. I think he has a broad understanding of what the department needs. He was tapped by the previous chief to rise to being a deputy, and he's demonstrated the capacity to lead. And Marcus also has built strong ties in the community, and community ties, I think, are probably more important than ever in policing in Montgomery County. I think we're well aware of it. This is a crucial nomination, and we've taken it pretty seriously. We've conducted probably the most inclusive and open police chief search in the county's history, and I want to mention that Marcus was one of the top candidates at the end of that search. I've heard from residents and community-based organizations, labor leaders, religious leaders, county council members, and who have all clearly stated what they expect out of a police chief. Your deliberations, not unlike my thoughts, have helped inform what we're trying to do with the police department. They simply don't want a continuation of the status quo, and people recognize that we're in a different time, and expectations, and particularly consciousness of how police are perceived in the community, have evolved. Everyone wants to see changes to make a good department even better and rebuild the trust that's been shaken by some recent interactions between a few officers and members of the public. And this is another example when the actions of a few wind up raining down on everybody, and it's unfortunate. More than anything, we need all residents to believe that policing in Montgomery County is about making everyone feel safer. After talking to Marcus, I'm confident he's willing and able to head this department and lead it to implement the reforms that will make the department stronger, and that'll have relationships within the department and with the officers, and we'll be able to engage them as we move forward. Reform has to be led from the top, but ultimately needs to be embraced by everyone. And with this history of having risen from within, that should be an asset to them in carrying this out. So with that, I'd like to present Marcus Jones to you, my candidate for the office of police chief. And
Thank you.
And again, I apologize for having to leave. I had intended to be here for the discussion, but I think Marcus will be able to handle himself. I'm not worried about that.
I think so.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, County Executive. Before we turn to you, Assistant Chief Jones, I just want to note that here in Montgomery County, as you are very well aware, because you spent over 30 years in service, of course, we have a tradition of high expectations. And we also have a tradition of supporting our employees, because at the end of the day, there is really no quality of life unless our fine employees are able to go out there day in and day out and provide the best service. And so I first want to take a moment to acknowledge and to thank the fine members of our police department who have been led by you this year, pretty much, and are there always doing whatever they can, not only to keep us safe, but also I have seen firsthand the efforts that have been made in different corners of the county to establish appropriate community connections. And so I really appreciate that. I also want to mention that I think the last time that you were here, we actually had a pretty extensive conversation. And I made the comment that this is a complex county, and that the person who would lead this department needs to be somebody that understands the nuances of leading such a complex county. And I must admit that in my mind, I was, of course, thinking of somebody like you. I've had so many different members of the community come to me and say, I remember when, Marcus was there facilitating this type of connection between two community groups that were at odds, and quietly doing all this work and setting up all these things. And so that really stood out for me, I have to say. At the same time, I think that we cannot ignore the fact that, yes, we live at a time that social media, we live at a time where there is a lot of attention paid to this issue of, how does our community present itself? How does our community feel vis-a-vis the relationship with our police officers? And also, we live in a time where there's a lot of politicizing of these types of, services. So we have a lot of work to do to ensure that we restore the trust of the community, which is number one, and also make sure that our police department understands that we are here to support, to provide the resources, and to provide everything possible, but that we have high expectations, and we always will. So with that context, we do have 7 questions, which are formal questions, and then we'll open it up for a conversation with you. But I have to say that even though it's been a long process, I'm really glad that we are finally here. So let me start with the first question.
Okay.
Police accountability has been an ongoing concern. While there seems to be excellent accountability and follow-through in the your formal disciplinary process, several recent incidents have brought to light concerns about whether fellow police officers also hold one another accountable. Further, many residents may not feel that they can bring complaints to you, either because they don't know how the process works or they don't feel it will resolve the issue. As chief, what steps will you take to ensure accountability throughout the department and build community trust in the police disciplinary process?
Okay. So the first thing I'll say is good morning. And thank you again, Council President Navarro and the Council Vice President Katz, and I appreciate and humbled by the opportunity of this nomination. So to answer your question, there are 2 parts to it. The first is how to increase familiarity with our departments, how we receive complaints. And one of the things, by making our officers more visible and available within our communities, will also make our complaint process more open. Currently, information about filing a complaint, we realize is difficult even to find on our website, as an example. We do have the availability to have complaints in our governmental buildings, as well as in, for example, like in libraries, but also in our police stations that people can come to. But we know that we want to make that availability to them as simple as possible. But we know even on the website, for example, it's difficult to navigate through the system in order to actually find the actual complaint form. So we want to certainly display complaint-related material more prominently. We can also make certain that our officers are familiar with the process and have materials to let residents know how to file such complaints. The second part deals with the police disciplinary process. As you note, there is accountability and follow-through. However, the availability of information about procedures and process is somewhat lacking. Our staff maintains contact with our complainants and are provided with the findings of the investigation or the complaint. Trial boards, for example, are now public by law, but they are often canceled due to agreements made prior to the trial board occurring. As we look to increase transparency in this regard, we are bound by our contracts with the FOP and by the state's Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. We report these findings of these investigations within the boundaries of the law and within the boundaries of our collective bargaining agreements. Okay.
The county is one of the most diverse counties in the nation, and 1/3 of our residents are immigrants. It is critical that our police force mirrors the communities that they serve. What are your plans to increase diversity among sworn officers? And also, what are your plans to increase cultural competency among current officers?
Excellent question. I will say we are constantly working to increase diversity among our sworn officers, and we place a high value on our officers reflecting our community. We recruit up and down the East Coast, as an example, at career fairs that attract minority candidates. We are working to increase our social media presence generally, and we have a Facebook feature aimed at attracting women candidates, as an example. However, we must also recognize that our larger difficulty is in attracting any recruits. We are, in my mind, we are in a recruiting crisis. The department has not filled our last 2 training classes. Our last class had 582 applicants, of which 314 of them took the entry test, which means that all of them did not participate in that process. In the past, we might attract double the number of applicants for this process. Some other jurisdictions are also offering sign-in bonuses and other incentives, and our qualifications are also higher than in some other areas. We are also bound by state standards that others not in Maryland do not have to follow. We are working to make our testing more accessible by offering the initial test online. We've also taken the test to some of our younger folks, particularly our millennials. We've actually, instead of having them come to us, we've gone to other centralized locations like the University of Maryland to make that process easier. And I think we are proud to recognize that we're continuing to grow our police cadet program. And if I might just add, our police cadet program, which existed back in the 70s, and it was really people who participated in that program were really what I call homegrown talent. And now I think we have to go back to really trying to, attract our own homegrown talent. These are our folks who were raised in Montgomery County, who live in Montgomery County, who know Montgomery County really well. And so I think the focus for our police department is to know that we have an ability and opportunity to actually reach out to young folks who are interested in the career, who and the way we do this is that by the cadet program, we are paying our cadets a salary, a part-time salary, and we are having them to actually work for us part-time while they're in school. And the objective is that they would then be able to meet the qualifications to join the police department within about a 2-year window. And within that 2-year window, we would then have the ability to bring them on board because they would have been acclimated to our organization and grown to know a little bit about our department. This ability gives us this opportunity gives us the ability to really reach out to students at Montgomery College, to even students who are just getting ready to graduate from high school, going to college, University of Maryland, or other local universities, Shady Grove, for example. They are then have the ability to join us, and we've really been focusing on minority communities. We're also asking many of our partners in our community to really assist us by encouraging the young people that they recognize would make excellent police officers in the community who provide an asset to our department to also work with us. We are working to increase cultural competence among our officers, primarily through some curriculum changes at our Public Safety Training Academy. We will continue those efforts with currently serving officers as well, and are looking the best ways to do this. We will also seek best practices from other law enforcement departments, research groups, and others to establish effective methods in relationship building.
The council recently introduced a bill on community policing. It lays out clear objectives and reporting requirements, but leaves discretion to the department to enact new or enhanced initiatives. What types of community policing initiatives are you considering?
So community policing and problem-oriented policing have been a part of our training and operations for many years. And I expect that we will be expanding on and improving in the world of community policing as a result of these changes we will make through our work and through the work of the council. I have formed an executive work group to address the topics of community policing and expect to complete a review over the next several weeks. In the meantime, I can tell you I am examining several initiatives. Those include increasing the staffing of our community engagement division and broadening our partnerships with community organizations. We are also considering several options for reorganization and redistricting that will result in officers patrolling smaller areas and thus becoming more familiar to our residents. We want to promote community policing by assigning more officers to beats, measuring officer performance by community interactions, and handling more non-emergency calls by phone to free up more time. Our community continues to grow, and it is time for the department to reevaluate our patrol workload. I am also exploring an opportunity to bring back the Police Athletic League program that I think that it was a proven program for this community in the late 90s, early 2000s, only to be cut by budget issues. And I plan to look at least two areas in the county to begin with that we could start this program that I think will be vitally impactful in the community policing realm.
Thank you. During various community forums, the issue of racial profiling was brought up and mentioned several times by residents. What steps are you taking to ensure that racial profiling does not occur in our community?
So, racial profiling is an issue that I take personally. I am personally offended by any law enforcement officer, and particularly here in Montgomery County, that would police on a style to racially profile any citizen in this county. I will not tolerate it with my officers. I will take a very strong stance to address it and to eliminate it. We will ensure through constant training and reinforcement that profiling is not acceptable. At the same time, we will make certain that there is better understanding of some of our practices that are not profiling, but which can be seen as that. I am also strengthening standards and accountability for pretextual stops, as an example, to ensure that they are used only to support the investigation and used as noted within the Constitution of the United States and as noted by the Supreme Court. I plan to request an external audit of this department's policies and practices related to traffic stops to ensure the department is doing all it can to eliminate racial profiling while being transparent to this community. This will provide an opportunity for this department to address any such concerns if discovered during this audit, and we will address that accordingly.
There's been a lot of recent turnover within the police department since Chief Major retired. Many top and mid-management personnel have also retired, and still more are in the drop retirement program and will leave soon. What are your plans for management and oversight at the assistant chief level, and how do you plan to prioritize innovation and transformational leadership at the assistant chief level and throughout the department?
So in my 34 years, I've never seen such a sort of a recent turnover, particularly amongst senior management. And it's going to be a challenge. The first thing I'll say is that I believe we have a large bench of talent that is ready and able to take over the roles such as assistant chiefs, the vacancies that we have, and we have a tremendous amount of talent that are ready to serve in roles as captains, commanders, and lieutenants. So I feel good about that part of it. It is a part of a normal process unfortunately, for our senior officers to retire, particularly when there sometimes is a change in leadership. As I look to fill these several spots in the executive and command ranks, I will focus on the potential of applicants to bring innovative ideas to the department. The department is in a very interesting time, as there will be newly appointed assistant chiefs in 3 bureaus. I will be seeking change agents who have the respect of our officers and who will be able to share my vision and lead in the most effective way. I plan to explore appointing a civilian assistant chief with expertise in police community relations and evidence-based policing, as noted in conjunction with County Executive Elridge. But that's to remain open at this time. No department can function properly believing that everything is being done correctly. And I will encourage our executive staff as well as our officers to think of and act on new and innovative ways to improve our service to Montgomery County residents.
So we've already discussed several issues that you plan to address as chief. Are there any other initiatives that you plan to focus, and why?
Yes. I will begin to focus on updating policies and practices to prevent excessive use of force. And one of those ways to do that is to look at equipping all of our officers with tasers as a less lethal weapon, as an example. Requiring our officers to intervene when they observe excessive uses of force in the field, and continuing to improve and expand de-escalation training in the academy. We do it, but we know that we can encompass this in many other avenues of our training, and making sure that we're monitoring this through our performances throughout the county on a daily basis. And I also plan to partner with other county departments, nonprofit organizations, and others to find alternatives to arresting people who commit minor offenses stemming from mental illness, substance abuse, poverty, and homelessness. And I will say that I think that, again, when we look at many of the issues that are surrounding what our officers deal with on a daily basis, I think in conjunction with my vision, I've shared this with Mr. Elridge, and we've come to some agreement that, again, we want to make sure that we're strengthening our standards and accountability practices. And again, I've spoken to you all again about the promotion of what we're doing with community policing, to also focus on, which I think would be very important for this community, is to have an outside auditor look at our practices, to be able to have and share that with community members, to bring them in, to make that inclusive, so that they're a part of that process, and know what that looks like. So that when that final report is presented to us, that we would then be able to really kind of look at how we can improve and work with, with the legislation such as the commission or police advisory commission, that we would be able to make some changes if that so-called was put into place. Okay.
Do you have any conflicts of interest of which the council should be aware?
No, I do not. I would just say, just briefly, that my sole interest is serving the citizens of this great county. And I will say, again, for 34 years I've lived in this county. I've stated this, that I've raised my family in this county, that I have worked with some tremendous county partners of people who really care about this community in many facets. It's an incredible place for my family to have lived, and it's phenomenal for me to have the opportunity to be here today, and I'm humbled by this opportunity. So again, thank you for that.
Thank you, and of course we have, the entire council is lit over here, but I think that as we are lit. I know, okay, we'll translate that another day. But what I will say is that it is evident by, your responses and the complexity of these questions that it is so important for somebody like you, in my opinion, to lead this police department. No doubt that as we think about, the issues that you were just describing, like homelessness and poverty and things like that, we are a county that has urban centers, that has suburban areas, rural areas. We are a county that has single-family home, areas as well. And so in that sense, once again, I think that we are a microcosm of of the country, and it is a complex place. And so the only thing I will add in terms of what, your responses and have been is that, yes, you've been here for over 30 years, and that is a huge plus. But of course, this is an ever-changing county, and so I do look forward to your exploration of innovative initiatives and interventions that can continue to address this extraordinary diversity and complexity as well. So really do appreciate your service thus far. So let me turn it now over to Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you, Assistant Chief Jones. This is surreal, because this has been a long time coming. Let me just say that as a young man who met you quite some time ago, 34 years ago when you moved to this area, who in full disclosure is a member of the church that you attend, and knowing your family, it's been good to be able to see you continue to grow and evolve into what I feel is the future of our police force. And it's one of the reasons why when you were identified as one of the final candidates, it was clear to me that you were the one and only choice. It's unfortunate that through this process, we've kind of muddled along, but I'm not going to rehash the past here. We are where we are, and I'm very happy that we now have you before us. I'm also incredibly happy about some of the comments that you've made that truly are a testament to you understanding where we can go as a county. I will tell you that I represent one of the largest areas of Montgomery County in terms of square miles because our police in the 5th and 6th District are incredibly strained when it comes to being able to enact true community policing as they would like to be. And that involves a lot of our areas, Damascus, Barnesville, now no longer do I represent Poolesville, but did for a number of years. And those are all tremendous challenges when it comes to the police actually getting to all of those areas and being involved and engaged in the community. And so your initiative looking at redistricting for our police districts is going to be so imperative to a true community policing model. So I appreciate that. I did want to talk about something, and I'm not going to highlight all of the ideas that you had because I think that they're phenomenal. I do want to highlight on something that we haven't talked about as of yet, and that's, and get a little bit finer into it, which is about communication. And I really feel as though our police department can do a much better job when it comes to communication with our community. Most recently, we had an incident that involved one of our officers that caused a lot of angst in our community because no one was sure about what was happening with that particular incident. But more importantly, beyond that one, just making sure that when we have these type of incidents where we had officer use of force and communicating with the public to make sure that they understand, transparency is always key. And so from that perspective, can you tell me what you would do to lead the department to make sure that our community feels confident in terms of that the information that they're getting from the police is accurate and that they're getting all of the information they need to be able to be involved and engaged in this community and police process?
Okay. So thank you, Councilman Rice. I appreciate that question, and I will tell you that that is a major concern of mine as well. I know communication is vitally important in what we do each and every day. I know this community is very well in tune into things, events that are occurring across the county, and that we need to communicate to the best of our ability in order to do that. You know, a lot of our resources, when we look at some of the things that we have when we talk about sort of reorganization, our public information office is one of my main concerns of how that is structured. We are working on some of those fixes with the amount of resources that we currently have. But I will tell you, I have a vision of bringing in some expert assistance that will, I think, that for people who have been in the field of communication, and there's no disrespect to any of my past public information officers, to that staff. They do a phenomenal job of communicating with the press and with the media outlets in order to get our information out. But I think that it will assist us in better serving in many, and you're starting to see some of those folks in the business in other police departments across the Washington metropolitan area. You're seeing it across the country where that's becoming a new sort of I wouldn't call it a phenomenon, but it's a new way of doing business, you might say. So I'm going to explore that option. And I think that will be something that will, again, that will help to provide me with counsel and advice that will assist us in a way that will be beneficial in the communication realm across this county.
Let me just close on my last one, because I know plenty of my colleagues have their lights on and have questions or comments that they want to make. I can't tell you how much the community policing model and what you talked about in terms of expansion is incredibly important as well. I hope that will include, we included this as a part of our community policing bill, our school resource officers, which you know that I'm incredibly passionate about. Again, I want to highlight for some of my community has angst about having police officers in our schools, that these are resources to our students. As much as folks are concerned about a student having a negative interaction with a police officer, you also need to be concerned about that student having a negative interaction with the other 2,000 some odd students that are in that school. And I tell you, as a parent of a senior in high school, those are things that are also important as well. We need to make sure that the safety of our children is tantamount. And I think that our officers are trained appropriately and do a great job in making that happen. We can highlight examples like what happened at Clarksburg High School, to where a school resource officer was contacted by another student about a student carrying a gun, and identifying that, finding the weapon, and securing that, and ensuring that nothing happened at that school. But there are a myriad of so many other stories that go unreported about how our school resource officers are really keeping incidents from getting to that level. And so from that perspective, I know that we've had conversations about potential leadership opportunities within our school resource officer department. So in addition to what we're looking to do with expanding our community policing efforts under Ms. Pruitt, who's doing a phenomenal job, I think that she needs more resources, and I think that also expanding our school resource officer program will continue to better our community policing models in this county. I know it's something that you believe in, that you care about, and it's the reason why I support you. So thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Chief, thank you for your service and your commitment to our community and the men and women of our police department as well. I've said publicly a few times that to prove that how concerned you are about Montgomery County and about the officers of Montgomery County, you stayed in here when many others would have looked to leave, and you didn't, and we're so very pleased about that. And I also want to take a moment to thank the men and women of the Montgomery County Police Department directly, who each and every day risk their lives for us, and to make certain that our residents stay safe. They never get enough thanks, and I think we need to do that time and time again. I believe that the questions already asked and the answers you already have given reminded me, while I will be so very proud to vote for you to be our next chief of police. We need to continue to pledge to you and to all of our department that we will continue to provide the resources that you need to do your job. Just to say we need this being done and for us not to provide it is not fair nor wise. As you know, being a police officer has never been an easy job. It wasn't an easy job when you started those 34 years ago, and it's probably even become a little bit more difficult over those years, and especially today. And we are, as you mentioned, seeing a great concern about recruitment. Many people, especially our young people, can be hired a much more lucrative job with a whole lot less risk, and that's a concern. We need to make certain that we address how we can attract those officers. And I sincerely believe this council will do that, working with you to make certain that we will do that with incentives and anything else that it takes, not only for our officers, but for our dispatchers as well. I know that is another concern. We not only want to attract them, we want them to stay here to continue to work with us. As you mentioned earlier, we need to make certain our community feels comfortable. And that has to be done in a variety of ways. Some of what we might try might not always work immediately, but that means that we'll just have to try it again and try to figure out what will work immediately. Success doesn't always happen overnight, but we need to work together to do that. And as you also mentioned, we need to continue to communicate with all of our residents, and our businesses, and our visitors that our first responders are here to provide the very best service possible, and we need their help to do that. We want to continue to be one of the best, and I wrote down one of the best departments in America, and that's not actually correct. We want to continue to be the best department in America. And I know that you will ensure that our pride will continue to be a part of all of us. We're very proud of our police department. And again, I thank you and your entire family. I know your family is with you and has been, and it's always, they have certainly been a great part of Montgomery County all these many years, and they continue to be so. But we want to thank you and your entire family that all that you've done and all that you will be doing for Montgomery County. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Councilmember Joando.
Thank you, Council President, and Chief Jones, good to see you again.
Good to see you, sir.
Often people don't know we share a lot of things. That you're 3rd District for a long time, and you're also in the same fraternity, the best fraternity,
Absolutely.
Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity
Absolutely.
Incorporated. And so great to see you and great to meet with you yesterday and chat again, and look forward to many more conversations. I was really happy to hear you say that you have a vision for the county, and you've articulated for the police department. I have a vision too. I have a vision that we live in a county where every resident, regardless of where they live, what they look like, who they are, feels protected and safe by law enforcement, and every officer has the trust of that community and the support of this government so that they can do their job. And I think that's an achievable and laudable, not only laudable but achievable goal and vision for this county. That being said, as we've discussed, law enforcement's going through a transformation. We are figuring out, I think collectively as a nation, and Montgomery County is no different, how do we police in the 21st century? How do we make sure we can achieve that vision, and what tactics do we use? And I'm also heartened to hear some of the things that you've already thought about, many of which we've discussed, that you're considering. I wanted to ask you just a couple specific questions. We talked about transparency and accountability being so important to our community so that they can feel that they can trust and know what's happening. You talked about the complaint process. One of the serious challenges with complaints is the Maryland Public Information Act. And you may know that currently it's being interpreted to block any information by a resident who requests information about a complaint that they've made to know what has happened, because that's deemed a personnel record. This council has supported publicly this year legislation to remove that restriction and change the classification of complaints from personnel records so that residents who file a complaint can know what has happened. Do you support that legislation, and will you support that legislation?
I would need to look at that much more closely, Mr. Joando, just because of the impact that it would have. And to really kind of coordinate and talk about those issues, particularly with the union, as that becomes a very sensitive issue from that perspective. I totally understand where people feel as if they would want to know a lot of particulars about, the complaint process, the findings, which we do share. We share the findings of those investigations. What we don't share is what is the disciplinary process, as far as what is the discipline that was issued for that particular officer in the case where the finding was sustained in a particular incident.
Okay.
So with that being said, that's where I know the sensitivity arises from that perspective, from a personnel perspective about what's the discipline that's been handed down to that particular officer in that
Right.
in any given situation. So I will look at that much closely because I've not seen particulars to the proposals for a bill of that nature yet.
Okay, it's
Yes.
been, yeah, it's SB 362. It's been introduced several
Okay.
times, and I can follow up. And you should know that 27 other states have a much more transparent process by which they notify others about these disputes. So
Sure,
we're kind of an
I'm aware of
outlier.
some of that,
We're an
yes.
outlier on that
Yes,
regard.
I am aware of that, yes.
You mentioned the racial profiling issue, which is continues to be a challenge. We've had the incidents with the gentleman in White Oak and other incidences that we've heard. It was mentioned, as the council president said, at our town hall and during community meetings. I'm really happy to hear, as we've discussed, this idea of an external audit, bringing someone in to look at our disparate policing statistics. You mentioned police stops. But I'm traffic stops. I'm also hoping that, as we've discussed, you'll include things like the trespass orders, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest and assault charges, because I think we need to dig into all those data. As we've discussed, African Americans make up 19% of the population, but accounted for 50% of the arrests last year. We need to know what those charges were, where they happened, why they happened, so that we can analyze. Would you agree with that and commit to do
Sure,
that?
absolutely. I think from a holistic standpoint, I want it all to be a focus. I also want to know, as much as we have, we look at it from a general standpoint of our arrest data, who are we arresting and why, and where are those individuals from as well, right? I want to know, are they county residents? That, for some of those issues that might be, when we look at ourselves internally, why, and I'm trying to figure out a lot of times what's the root cause of us to having these issues in some of these areas, particularly like if you're dealing with disorderly conduct in a particular one general area, why is it? And how can we eliminate that, right? So we're looking for some positive outcomes as a result of this audit, and to be able to look at that data and to figure that out.
Great.
So,
And I'm glad, as we talked yesterday, the OLO, Office of Legislative Oversight, is going to be working with you all on it, data.
Yes.
And that can maybe help inform that process
Absolutely,
as well.
absolutely.
Last thing I wanted to mention, and I'm glad to hear you say root causes. I've talked about before how I think our philosophy needs to be that we view arrest as a societal failure. Of course, there's going to be incidences where we need to arrest people to protect the safety of the public, but whether it's mental health, drug abuse, poverty, homelessness, there are root causes that can lead to the situations that officers have to encounter every day, and knowing the data, knowing where it's happening, knowing why it's happening is going to be critical to changing some of those outcomes. Particularly on mental health, I wanted to suggest, and obviously this is an issue we're dealing with on both sides, with mental health being the leading cause of death for officers in the country, and we have an increasing mental health population in our jails and our prisons and arrests, so we have a real issue with mental health. There's a program called Cahoots that Oregon has put forward, and Denver is picking it up, where there is a nonviolent call to 911 for mental health. Police are not dispatched. It's actually a medic and a mental health professional who are dispatched for those calls. Is that something that you heard of, or would you be committed to looking into those type of responses?
Yeah, I have heard of a program similar to that. I don't know if it's exactly that program. I would be more than interested in looking at some of those things that I think would, again, if it's that there are many types of calls, I think, that exist that are not so-called police calls. It's just we're the easiest one to pick up the phone and call to make sure that somebody gets there to get help, right?
Right.
So we understand that. And if there's an opportunity for, and when we're able to sort of dissect what may be an actual issue that's not an emergency or doesn't need, our particular services to protect the safety of others or that particular individual, I am totally for if we can have additional services that from the mental health professionals that are able to go and deal with those situations.
Great,
I
thank
fully
you.
support that, yes.
And on the recruiting crisis, part of that vision we talked about, homegrown, I was so happy to hear you say homegrown. I think 5 years from now, we can be in a place where we have our kids like me, kids like you, kids like Councilmember Rice, others that see the changes we're making, see that we're trying to move forward in a positive way here and lead in Montgomery County in policing, and where we can recruit our own. And so I look forward to working with you to get to that vision.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. Acting Chief Jones, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, sir.
I know it's been a trying few months for you, various levels here, and you've been rising to the occasion, and I just want to publicly express my sympathy to you and the department for the recent passing of Officer Bamba.
Thank you.
And everything that we as a community have gone through as a result of that. And I appreciate the questions that have been asked, and some of those topics I discussed with you privately when we met earlier this week. But there are just two topics I want to discuss publicly right now. As the first LGBTQ member of the council, I've been speaking with many residents here about those issues, and there's a sentiment that we need to better train our police department for some of the modern era, if that's a polite way of saying it. Since 2015, there have been 49 hate crimes here in Montgomery County directly involving sexual orientation or gender bias. And that frequency has only increased over those 4 years. And right now, 50% of all incidents are against transgender women of color. And that is a regional systemic problem that we need to combat. And it's heartbreaking to see that some of the most vulnerable people in our community are being victimized at such levels that they are. And we need to keep chipping away at those systemic biases in the community, but we also need to modernize our police techniques and let our officers understand some of the changing dynamics of the 1.1 million residents here in Montgomery County. And I know that in years past there had been some LGBTQ trainings that the force underwent, but they're no longer being done. Can you talk to me about how we can educate our police officers to understand the 1.1 million residents and the dynamics that exist today?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's vitally important for, as we deal with the many different residents in our communities to understand some of the challenges that they go through, particularly when it comes to sort of their confidence in the policing, and how do we address it in a very sensitive manner that gives them to the confidence that they can report such crimes, and that they feel as if they are being heard, and that they have services available to them in order to be able to sort of get through those times of sort of unfortunate circumstances or those crimes that have been committed against them, that they have victim services as we would give for anyone else. I think it's vitally important that when I look at this internally from a police department training, that mechanism is that we make sure that we are focusing on that community that's most important to us, right? From a standpoint of that we understand the challenges that are before us, and that we understand the sensitivity piece from them. So from the community, in the sense of we want to make sure that our officers are truly educated. Yes, and you're right, and I noted that we did this training that we started back in 2006, and we were consistently working and talking about it, not only from an external standpoint, but also from an internal, to make sure that our officers were well aware, sensitive to those issues, and we addressed them accordingly to make sure that discrimination doesn't happen on any front from that perspective. And so, with that being said, I am committed to making sure that we reinstitute of that part of our training to make sure, and I also would look at those hate crimes, those gender, the biases pieces that are happening, incidents, and to have us to further evaluate them to see, what if there's some sort of trend that's occurring and how we can best effectively get the message out to our folks, how we can best address that and prevent those types of crimes from happening in the near future.
Well, I appreciate that commitment that you've just made, and just to be explicit in what I'm talking about, some of these trainings involve how to deal with domestic violence within the LGBTQ
Absolutely,
community,
right. Yes.
deal with sexual assault in the LGBTQ community, and as you mentioned, also use of pronouns for people that police interact with.
Absolutely, correct. Thank you, sir.
Last topic, switching gears, another aspect of the department which sometimes gets overlooked is road safety. Pedestrian safety is something that's near and dear to my heart, and that is actually an aspect of your portfolio. As we look at making our roadways safer, there's a lot more that needs to be done within the police department. In the first 10 months of 2019, there have been 10 deaths and 484 incidents regarding drivers, bicyclists, and pedestrians. And as we work towards enacting Vision Zero and making our roadways safer for everybody, the 42-point plan that is part of that Vision Zero, there are five aspects that are within your portfolio. And those are making driver training for police, review teams for fatal accidents, purchasing more unmarked cars to conduct enforcement, best practices regarding managing of collisions, and then new technology to better manage traffic and severe crashes. And curious to what your thoughts are about roadway safety and making sure that we dramatically reduce those 484 incidents that have already happened this year alone.
Absolutely. I will tell you, I take it very seriously. What I think a lot of folks in the county may not realize is that we actually have more fatal collisions in our county than we do homicides.
Yep.
And so that's, again, a lot of times communities sort of weigh policing with how many homicides does a county or a particular area have. We don't really talk about the fatal collisions and what could have prevented those fatal collisions, and to really get deep into the woods on that. And I think traffic safety is very important, and I think it's, there are a lot of educating has been done in the past, but there's a lot of work to be done. Particularly as we we drive around this county now, and then you see more pedestrians walking probably than ever before, particularly in our urban areas. And we have to make sure that our drivers are adhering to the laws, and we have to educate everyone, because we got to make sure that even our walkers, our pedestrians, are obeying traffic laws. Our bicyclists are obeying, but we have to understand that the rules of the road, that this education campaign is vitally important. I will tell you that I think we've begun to explore some changes within the police department to focus on some of those issues as it relates to Vision Zero. And one of those is that, just to highlight it, is that we are currently piloting a centralized traffic unit that officers that are specifically designed to our traffic unit and to address these common high incident areas that we are having around the county, and to address them in many ways, and not only just to do it from an enforcement standpoint, to come up with educational pieces, but also to look at what other engineering changes can be made to make the roadways safer for everyone. And because we're not the single partner in all of this, because there's state highways, there's the county DOT, there's a lot of other partners that are associated in this that we have been working with and will continue to work with. But we have to make sure that when we're making these suggestions and recommendations, that somebody's hearing what we're saying in order to make those changes. So I'm fully committed to that, to driving this, and I want those numbers to be to see a significant drop, not only in the fatal collisions, but also in traffic collisions as a whole. I want to see our numbers continuously drop over the next few years.
Well, thank you for that. We'll be having a council conversation in a few weeks on that topic alone, and whether it's you or someone else from the department, look forward to that. But the commonality between the two items I talked about and that others have shared is about modernization and making sure that we are policing in this century, in this decade.
Absolutely.
And times have changed, whether it's more people walking on the streets, bicycling, e-scooters, or more people living their lives as they truly are in our community, being respectful of them. So thank you very much. I look forward to working with you, and thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I look forward to it.
Councilmember Albornoz?
Thank you, Madam President. As I was reading Dan Morse's piece in the Washington Post this morning, the song, the Rascal Flatts song, "God Bless the Long and Winding Road That Led Me Straight to You," kept popping into my head. We are excited that you are here, sir. The first time I had the opportunity to meet you was when we served on a panel together that occurred in downtown Silver Spring shortly after some riots that occurred with youth after a concert. And at the time, there was actual serious consideration being given at the county on instituting a policy of a curfew because of the civic unrest among our youth that particular summer. And you, at that panel, provided what I thought was a master class in how to respectfully and sternly and politely and caringly engage our youth. And I thought you did a phenomenal job that night. I was impressed then, and I've continued to be impressed over the last 12 years as I've gotten to know you. And so I think you are going to do a fantastic job as our next police chief. I do want to start in the youth development space. I totally concur with bringing back important and tried and true programs and services like our Police Athletic League. I think we can go even further than that and work on collaboratively on STEAM-based programming together with our law enforcement because there's a lot of opportunities there. And I want to highlight what I think is a best practice. When we launched Excel Beyond the Bell 10 years ago, we did a training called Advancing Youth Development, and the SROs at the various schools that had EBB sites participated in that training. And everybody really acknowledged how powerful that training was and how helpful it was. And so as we look at community policing moving forward, and as we look at proactive measures that we can take to better engage our youth, I strongly urge you to look at trainings like that, and create the time and space for our officers to be able to take advantage of those trainings. Because we've talked about this extensively and also served on the Positive Youth Development Committee together. And I know you believe this. I know you know how important it is. And I just want to highlight that and confirm that that's a direction you want to take and those are actions that you'd like to pursue.
Oh, absolutely. I think that, and I appreciate those comments because I think what's most important and sort of the suggestions, because I think that, you know, when we look at a lot of the issues with our youth, you know, I've been involved in a lot of youth development type of programs for quite some time. You know, I've been a part of a mentoring group that I think has had some significant impact in this county, and the reason why I did that, and that was on a volunteer basis, is because I found that to be important to me. Because I think it's important that we make sure that, you know, we can have an ability to reach out to our youth, to show them that we can be good role models, but to also develop relationships with them, and most importantly, to understand them. And so it's vitally important that along the way that we, as the police department, we have a role to play. And as noted earlier, you know, it's not all about just an enforcement mechanism that a role that we play. We play another important role in order to prevent and to preserve the peace, but we also, in order to have community relation building, they have to be a part of that. And so the school resource officer program, I think, is vitally important. I fully support expanding it. I think we have some phenomenal school resource officers who are doing, you know, when we look at schools, those schools by themselves are a community within itself. And I tell our officers all the time is you treat it like the school resource officer treats that like it's their beat. You know, that's their responsibility. They own that. And they treat it as such. And even any officer that works in that area, I tell them the same thing, that, it's not just because it's the school resource officer's responsibility, it's also yours. But I fully support us becoming more engaging in the youth development type programs and being engaged in a way that we would be able to effectively do more communications that would be positive.
Great. Having worked in the executive branch, I know how important the relationship is between his or her appointees and the CAO and the county executive. There has to be trust. There has to be strong communication. In light of what's transpired over the last year, I know that there have, I assume, been numerous conversations within the executive branch on how to ensure that there is strong communication. But could you elaborate a little bit on that and talk about how you envision that relationship moving forward?
Sure. I will say this. I give much respect to any elected official and how they have an opportunity to have a vision for what they want and how they see things that they, as they direct this county. And over the course of my 34 years, I've seen it in many different facets in the way that the politics work. I am of the belief that you have to be able to communicate with those that you work for and those that you work with, right? And I think that it's important, and I see us as having an open dialogue about discussions and me being able to share my thoughts with the county executive and with his team, and to be able to share them in a way and to give my expert opinion on the way I see things, and the way my team, collectively we come together and we bring that vision to them. I think I'll continue to do that. I don't, again, at the end of the day, the county executive makes decisions and directs the work in many different facets. But I will say that I think that the ability of any individual that works for anyone should have the ability to have a voice, and I think Mr. Elrich has given me that voice, and we've had some really good discussions. Not always that we would agreed upon things maybe in the very beginning, but I see us coming around, turning the curve, you might say. So, and I say that for Mr. Klein, it's for his benefit.
That was really good. He's learning. All right. So I'll end with this, and Councilmember Jawando alluded to this, but I want to, as the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee and also a member of the Public Safety Committee, I am very concerned with the mental health issues, particularly as it relates to our first responders. And with the situation happening in New York, I know we've had recent discussions that this is a conversation happening across the nation right now within law enforcement offices. If you could just talk briefly about your plans in this space to ensure we provide maximum wraparound services for our first responders. And as a follow-up, I've discussed this with my colleague Sydney Katz. We are interested in learning more about where some of the gaps are and what more we can do collectively as a community to support our first responders.
Absolutely, and there's no doubt about it. I think over time we really have to understand the impact of this profession. And as noted, someone stated earlier, not only our sworn officers, but also what I consider our professional staff, such as our dispatchers and all, because it can be a very stressful occupation in many ways, more than one way. And I just returned from Major City Chiefs Conference in Chicago, and to hear several other departments, particularly the NYPD, speak of 10 such suicides that they've had in the year of 2019 alone, and how impactful that's been on their agency. And it's going across, and there's we had a couple of panel discussions about this, to the degree of what else can we do as police leaders to provide these types of services to our folks, and to not allow them to just simply feel as if they don't have the ability to come forward, and that there won't be these negative impact. There won't be a negative stigma attached to their crying out for help. And that's one thing I'm committed to making sure that we won't do that, that we won't make this a negative stigma against our officers, or, their family members or the other professional staff, that we are providing them with services. We are currently working with OHR in order to be able to provide better communication and information to all of our employees. We are also in the middle of, just beginning, I should say, in the collective bargaining negotiations to talk with the FOP about some of those. Some of the services that I'm concerned about is to make sure that no matter where officers live, that there's accessible practitioner help nearby to where they live, so they don't feel as if they have to sort of travel across one end of the county to the next, or that they've got to travel 2 counties over in order to get that. I know that the mental health profession is somewhat inundated sometimes. I hear people talk about, they try to get appointments and they might not get an appointment for like 2 or 3 months. And to me, that's unacceptable in our world, even though we do have a police psychiatrist that is connected to our department that works out of OHR. And I was just told by OHR that they have hired a second police psychologist. So that's going to tremendously help us. But we're also looking at what are some of the other needs, and we're exploring that. So when we come back, I think in December, we'll have a much more definitive sort of a plan of what that's looking like, what are those services, and what are some of the shortcomings if we can identify such. We'll be more than happy to share that with the council. So thank you.
Councilmember Hooker.
Thank you, Madam President. Chief, I'm so glad to see you in front of us in
Good
this,
to see you,
in this
sir.
role. Thank you. I want to echo what my public safety chairman said about it. I really appreciate your willingness to stick with us through 34 years in a very high-stress job, especially at the command structure, and I really personally appreciate the 5 years we've been able to work together. Whether I was working with Commander Jones or Assistant Chief Jones or Acting Chief Jones, I really appreciated your dedication and just love. It's evident for Montgomery County, and your commitment to the community and to the county you live in, and personally, to your responsiveness and availability to me personally in the community, whether it's happy events like so many East County National Night Outs or very difficult events like numbers of shootings and the Flower Branch fire and other things. I've always just really appreciate your dedication, your responsiveness, and your candor in talking me through a lot of those very difficult situations and helping me understand the challenges you're facing and the craft that you practice every day. So I'm really glad to see you in this position. We talked a lot about community policing, and I don't want to belabor it, but this is how I understand it, how I try to say it to people. I've heard Chief Manger say this, and I have heard you say this, essentially. We shouldn't have to choose between having a very safe community, and we have a very safe community, and a community that has very strong police-community relations, right? That's a false choice.
Right.
That we have a stronger and safer community if we have very strong police-community relations. And we want our police as much as possible to live in the county and be part of the community and feel like it's their community and feel as protective of the community and our neighborhoods as we all do. And I think we all agree that's the goal, right? And we want to do everything we can to support you to get to that goal, rather than have this false choice of people feeling like you need a really aggressive police force in the pursuit of safety that has an unintentional consequence in terms of community relations. Is that a fair summary of your
Absolutely.
outlook?
Yes, I would agree so, yes.
So if I'm right about that, can you talk at all about, I don't think we've touched on this, what's the role of your working with the FOP and with community organizations to get to that goal?
Yes, that's a great question. I think for many years, I think that it's been clear that police management and the FOP have not had a great working relationship to begin with. And I think that over the time, there's a lot of reasons for that, about feelings about why that has occurred on both sides. I think it's my role I think it's my vision as well, and I've already had conversations with the FOP leadership, with President Cook, and in an attempt to for us to be able to put a lot of these issues out on the table and talk through them, and to understand each other's positions in a much more collaborative way. It's going to be a challenge. It's simply not easy, and I totally understand that. But I'm committed that we cannot continue to do business the way we've done it over the past several years. And that's one of the things that I want to bring differently to the table to be able to have better workings, not only with just the FOP, but with McGeo, for us to be able to work through a lot of these dynamics to make our employees feel, feel as if that we are giving them the respect in the labor world that they so rightly deserve. And in order to be able to accomplish, again, the mission and the goal of the police department to make sure that our community feels safe and that they can trust us in that regard. And I think that that's vitally, it all combines together. Community organizations, again, many of the community organizations, again, I've worked with many people in the community. Always open to having a dialogue and having a conversation about issues. Even those who may not have supported me over the past several months, I have already sat down with and willing to sit down with to continue to have a dialogue about policing in Montgomery County. I'm not afraid of that. I think it's vitally important. I think in my opinion, where we are in our society, when we choose to kind of go into our own corners and not have a conversation, and we want to go just talk to social media and have that to be our discussion, then I don't think we're making any progress, and we're not going to make this place a better place to live. And so it's vitally important, in order to be able to bridge that gap, is that we come out of those collective corners. I'm committed of already walking out of that corner, meeting halfway, sitting down, let's talk, let's figure it out, and I'm going to listen. I am going to hear. I'm not going to say you're going to agree with me 100% of the time, vice versa, but I think at the end of the day, I can understand where you're coming from, and I respect your opinion. But at the end of the day, we also have to do, when we look at it, what's the best, and as long as we're not doing anything detrimental to the citizens of this county, I think that's vitally important for us to be successful.
Thank you. We talked a little bit about public communication, and and maybe we'll explore this in a public safety hearing, but I'm concerned a little bit. I've talked to you individually about some of the public safety alerts, even just this year, where I felt like we unintentionally created some unnecessary fear in the community, or let it last longer than we maybe needed to. One was the tragic incident involving Officer Bamba.
Right.
Another one was the auto theft recently in Silver Spring that was reported as a shooting, and resulted in a school lockdown and a huge traffic snarl and other things.
Right.
And then, of course, there's been multiple alerts at Montgomery College of an active shooter, and then when there was an active shooter in the mall, that was reported at Montgomery College as a fire drill. So I think we have some room for improvement in this area, and I don't know if you have anything to share today, but maybe we'll be able to explore.
I would only just say this, and look, we live in a world of information on steroids, of things being thrown out at a very fast pace. And then we also have this expectation, and I understand it, we have an expectation of receiving the information so we know, that we're informed and we know what's going on in a very timely manner. And I'll give an example of the case in Silver Spring involving the quote shooting, which was not a shooting. What happened was that there was this vehicle collision that involved the young man in the vehicle. Fire rescue responded, and the injuries that this individual sustained were sort of horrific in a way that it looked as if the individual had been shot. And in fact, when the individual was transported to Washington MedStar, even the doctors believed that the emergency room doctors believed that the individual was shot. After they did significant cleanup of that individual, they determined that it was not, there were no bullet wounds in this individual. but that it was simply from the individual not wearing his seatbelt and probably just of the injuries being thrown about the cabin as a result of and it was just horrific in many ways. But the problem lied that we had to treat it right as a shooting until we knew differently. And so unfortunately, we knew we had information that there were two individuals that had bailed out of that car. And so what is the most important thing for us? I think the most important thing for us is to make sure that our schools are safe. And again, we apologize when we see, that our communities sort of get locked down in traffic and detours and all of the like. But I think that was the priority for us, right? And so can we communicate that better? Yes, I would agree. We could be better in how we figure that out and get the message out to the public. But there are times when we don't really have the answer to the question in some of these investigations, and we have to slow that down. And similarly, that's where sometimes I think we'll have to come out with a more positive, communicative way of saying to the public, can we have a little, can you be patient with us until we figure this out? So,
thank you.
Okay.
I want to echo everything Councilmember Glass said about pedestrian safety. That's very much top of mind for me as well. I know I wrote to you about a month ago about the new state law that allows for increased fines that was sponsored by Montgomery County Delegate Stewart, increased fines for cars that endanger a pedestrian who's in a crosswalk.
Right.
And doubles the fine for that. So, and I think we all have work to do too. The 3 E's of pedestrian safety, we work a lot with DOT on the engineering and the education component. I don't think we do enough work with you all on the enforcement component, and I think that's really kind of a missing piece that we all should work on.
Sure.
And I hope that that'll be a priority for you. I hope you'll vigorously enforce that new law, and I think it's not only good for the community, I think it's really good for the police force and the police department and the community relations. I think you'd engender so much goodwill in Silver Spring, I can tell you, an area I know pretty well, if you just did the kind of stings or enforcement actions that Fairfax are doing, there, where they're issuing tickets very visibly,
right,
educating drivers. I think you'd meet with a lot of goodwill among the pedestrians and others in Silver Spring, and I hope to work with you on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, sir. Yeah.
The trouble when you push your button too late here is you mark up your notes so much they're beyond recognition here. As you know, in 2017, the council added funding in the budget for a new detective in the vice unit. Do you think that'll be filled this year?
That position has been opened, and I believe they're going through the selection process as we speak. So
Great.
We should have that detective in the seat probably within about 30 days.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thanks. Use of force policy. We've discussed, you and I have discussed some of the inappropriate actions of officers in White Oak and in Aspen Hill. But we've also discussed some of the inaction or lack of action or lack of intervention of officers who were standing by in both of those incidents. And I've heard you say today, I'm glad to hear you say you expect officers to intervene when there's a violation of policy that they see. Can you elaborate on your plans to communicate that and enforce it to a big force?
So, yeah, absolutely. So our intention will be to craft a policy, but not only just to craft a policy that we are wanting our officers to be able to step in and sort of, when someone is what we consider to be going outside of the realm of the utilization of use of force, or even from a standpoint of sort of having this interaction with the citizen and it's not going very well, and it's that they could then interact. But we're also going to utilize that in our training mechanisms to train that way. To have our officers to have them intervene so that they understand that this is the expectation that we are setting forth for them to act in such a manner. Again, some of the more difficulties of and not totally, but I would just say, for example, if you have a officer who has less time on and you have a veteran officer who might be going sort of outside of the realm, that younger officer may not feel that they have the support or they have the ability to sort of step in for that veteran officer. But here we are going to say, no matter what your rank is, no matter how much time you have on, that these are the expectations you have because you're as accountable to what's going on as the other officers that are involved. So that's a little bit of the focus that we'll be, and we're putting that plan together now, and we'll be trying to implement that within the next few months.
Thank you.
Okay.
Finally, just on mental health, I'm, as you are, alarmed to hear that there's a 2 to 3 month wait for officers to get a mental health examination or appointment, and I'm glad to hear about the second police psychologist. I've always been told there are many officers who are afraid to reach out and get help, both because of the stigma that exists in society and fear that it'll affect their career.
Right.
Do you have thoughts on what we need to do to address that?
So yes, and I think, again, this is a large problem within our entire profession. And it is it's very, because you have officers who feel as if they said they came forth and that they, were suffering from some mental health type of crisis, that we would then, go and suspend their police powers and take their gun away from them and reassign them to sort of a desk duty, or they can no longer do what they were, in their particular assignments, that they couldn't do their jobs. And so I do have concerns about that, and I think all of it, you have chiefs across America that are thinking the same way as I am. How can we better serve those individuals to make sure that that doesn't happen? But there may be extreme cases that we don't have any choice, right? Depending upon the safety for that individual as well as the safety of others around that individual. We have to make sure we're mindfully concerned about those folks that could be impacted by some negative action in the worst case scenario. And hopefully that never happens. But the reality is that we have to keep that in the back of our minds as leaders. And so I will say to our folks that I think that, first of all, the most important thing that we want to get them is for them not to be concerned about what's going to happen from that stigma. That's not my number one priority. My number one priority is to get them the help that they need as quickly as possible. That's what I'm going to be trying to focus, and that's the message that I'm trying to get to our folks to make sure that they understand.
Great. And the flip side of that, in the community awareness of mental health and the issues in the community, I'm just glad to hear what you said in the wake of the Robert White shooting.
Right.
Your support for enhanced mental health awareness training for our officers and the changes in the response protocol to get mental health professionals on the ground when it's an individual call.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I look forward to continued work together.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you to the Council President and to my colleagues. A lot of my questions have been asked. I really appreciated the opportunity for you and I to sit down together and discuss a lot of my questions, so I will try my best to be as brief as possible. But I appreciate the fact that my colleague, Councilmember Albornoz, raised the Rascal Flatts song, "Bless the Broken Road." I was thinking about more of a Grateful Dead, what a long, strange trip it's been. But it certainly has been a challenging process. I appreciate all of my colleagues and our commitment to getting this right and making sure that we do our job to fill one of the most important jobs in our county for the public safety and quality of life of 1.1 million residents, for the 1,300 members of the force. And I am reminded, based on recent events, that bumpy roads lead to beautiful places. So hopefully that's where we end up here as well. But I do have a few questions. I share the issues raised about community policing, in particular about pedestrian safety in particular, and especially about mental health in particular. Several of us were at the memorial service for Officer Bamba, and express condolences to members of the force and to Officer Bamba's wife and to their family. But I wanted to express our condolences again, and also just reiterate what many of us have shared, our commitment to providing the financial resources and any services that are needed to make sure that those who have unique challenges, because all of our county employees and all of our county residents face mental health and emotional well-being issues that we need to be diligent about, but those who have a firearm and carry a badge and are pressured to be placed under these circumstances that our officers are, face unique challenges, and you've answered that pretty thoroughly, but I just wanted to reiterate that point that many of my colleagues have made, and look forward to working together to address some of the pedestrian safety issues as well that are particularly important in District 1, where we have a lot of urban environments, some of our busiest roads, some of our most dangerous pedestrian traffic areas, and an area where we have had multiple pedestrian and bike deaths in recent history here. So hopefully we can work together on that. But a couple questions that I have for you. One is, from time to time, we hear about the concerns from some residents about the size and the number of our police districts, and particularly in the context of community policing. I was just hoping you could share any thoughts that you have of whether or not, based on the increase in the population and the type of communities that we have in Montgomery County, if the current 6-district structure is adequate, or whether or not you foresee any changes to that approach?
So I agree. Montgomery County, I go back in time for the fact that I've been around here for 34 years. When I first came on, we had 5 police districts, and I came on in 1985. And we had those 5 police districts, and Germantown being the most notable, because that's where I worked. But it basically was Gaithersburg, Germantown, from Shady Grove Road to the county line. That was the Germantown district. That encompassed Poolsville, Damascus, all of the above, right? And so we had to really look at it as the county continued to grow. Then we're probably growing somewhere from around 700,000 or 800,000 people, and the county's growing immensely, up county particularly, and in the Gaithersburg area, that we knew that we had to develop another police district. And so the 6th district was developed in 2000. It was not solely done, quote, overnight. It was done sort of a slow pace. It was brought in sort of a substation type hybrid full station, but over the next 6 to 8 years, we were able to have it a full running police district. And here we are in 2019, and we look at, we're still at 6 police districts. And I can tell you, and now with the population well over 1.1 million people, and particularly a concentrated large growth in our urban communities, that we have to look at this differently. And I think that this is something we've talked about, but nothing that we've really kind of pushed the ball forward. And I'm preparing to look at ways to push this forward, because when we talk about collectively, how can we be better at community policing? In order for my officers to be able to do a lot of those things, they have to have the time to do them. And if you're running from call to call to call, and you really don't have that time, then we're not going to be effective, and we're only talking out of the side of our necks. And so I don't want to talk out of the side of my neck. I'd like to be able to do something that's tangible, and that would be forthcoming. So I think where we start with this is what we haven't done in a few years is we need to do a workload analysis. And so when we do a workload analysis, when we look at some of these areas that are highly impacted because of large, quote, beats, sectors, that we can figure out better ways to better serve this community and provide better response times, provide better, more time to have the ability to do community policing. I think that would be impactful. So that is high on my list. In fact, we've already begun to have those discussions. I've got folks working behind the scenes to start working towards the workload analysis piece, and so we're going to start setting some suspense dates, and we'll keep you folks informed as that is progressing.
I appreciate that. I think the workload analysis is really important, not only to the officers, but to the residents, and in our goals of achieving true community policing. So appreciate the work that you're doing, your commitment to that. You mentioned earlier about the interest in an assistant chief for or a civilian assistant chief of doing some type of reorganization. I know that's an interest of the county executive as well. Can we get a commitment that as that process occurs, that prior to a candidate or candidates being considered and prior to that process beginning, that the council get the regulation for the job description, be able to weigh in on what is a pretty significant organizational change to the structure of the department, and I think is a policy
Yeah.
question as much as a management question, is even more frankly than a management
Absolutely.
question?
Absolutely. Yes, and I think that, again, because we're going to have to work with you all in order, if that's the where the county executive wants to take this, and where we can work through this. Again, there's some work in progress already occurring of what that might look like. So, but if that decision is made, we will definitely make sure that you all have that information well in advance. So.
Great, just before the candidate or candidates
absolutely, absolutely,
are
yes.
considered, that
Right.
the council, as a policy discussion in a public setting, is able to
Yes.
discuss the policy change and the impact that would have on
Yeah.
the residents and on the force.
Absolutely, and I think that it's going to have to be a requirement anyway, because there would have to be some changes in the personnel regulations before I could even announce it.
Yes, we've had some issues in the past.
I
of,
understand.
Concurrent regulation changes to the personnel side of things and a candidate that was being presented by the administration. I just want to make sure that in a job as important as this and a decision as critical as this, that we not put the cart next to the horse or in front of the horse, that we make sure that we put them in the right order.
Point well taken. Thank you so much.
I appreciate that. And then, final question, given the events that have led us to this moment, and several others have mentioned this as well, but there's been a fair amount of discussion about morale in the department, something that I'm personally very concerned about, and I know some of my colleagues, many of my colleagues, not all my colleagues, are concerned about as well. As public officials, as elected leaders, what can we do to make sure that you have the faith and resources that you need to ensure that you can do what you need to do to lead the department?
So I will say this, there's no other police department in this country that I would prefer to work for. I think this is one of the finest, and as Councilman Katz noted earlier, I believe it is the best police department. And the individual, and what makes that is not just for the fact that it's Montgomery County, but it's the people who work for this department is what makes this department the best department. We have some tremendous talent here. There's so much that doesn't get recognized. I think we all get caught up in our normal course of our lives, and we just kind of take it for granted to some degree, and until the spotlight shines on an incident or something that occurs within the police department, that's the only time we're sometimes recognized. But I will tell you, I think that officers, there's a lot of discussion that's been going on about policing across this country over some time now. This is not something that just started yesterday. It's been going on for quite some times, and sometimes the negative can weigh down on officers already the tough job. I want to thank this council for the tremendous support that you've provided to our department, not only from just budgetary, ask and resources that you provided us, but also some of the words and your presence at several events that are vitally important. When we lose an officer in the line of duty, that is the ultimate loss, and regardless of whether it's unfortunately, like in the case of what we just went through, where an officer took his own life, but that, because of the stresses and all of the other things that go on, and what this commitment is to this community. People need to feel as if that they are appreciated for what they do on each and every day, of just putting themselves in the line of quote, and I'd say this loosely, of incidents that could occur that can go one way or the other. And it's tough, right? And it's very tough. And I would just say to you and the council to keep that in the back of your minds, and to know that our officers do seek your support, and they know that they have it in many ways, but that they also feel as if you can reiterate it different events, and when you see them, I think it goes a very, very long way.
Appreciate it. I just want to reiterate my support for you, for several of your senior leadership team that are in the back here watching, for any officers who are
we
watching
will
the
make
proceedings or
yes.
listening to the proceedings, and just wanted to, recognize as well, you haven't been acting in this job, you've been doing this job for many months, and just appreciate the professionalism that you've shown and the dedication that you've demonstrated to the department and to the county over what's been a bit of a challenging process that I'm glad is getting very close to a conclusion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, our last light, Councilmember Reamer.
I will be brief. Chief Jones, thank you so much. I really appreciate your stepping up to serve and enduring through the process. I want to pick up where you just left off. Our officers do need to know that we support them and that we appreciate the challenge of their work. And certainly, personally, my support for you is not only support for you, but support for all the leadership and the officers of our department and the work that they do.
Thank you.
Your local knowledge, your time, even if you hadn't grown up here as you did, but the years that you put in the department is an essential part of your qualification for this job. You've got to know Montgomery County and all of its subtleties and nuances and variations and complexities, and you do that. And it's going to really put you in a great place to continue your leadership for the county. I want to really just commend your comment a moment ago about how it's important for, in a challenging conversation, that different voices don't retreat and become different camps that are sort of firing at each other from a distance, but are actually sitting together and trying to understand and discuss differences and forge some kind of, even if you can't get to common ground, at least, a respectful environment, and decisions that are made are always better when you hear from all the voices. That has been a theme for me in our Policing Advisory Commission, and I really appreciate your support for that, and I look forward to how you implement it. The fact that you're planning to proceed quickly with some external expertise and helping you to, identify opportunities for improvement, that says a lot, because when you respect and value something, that means you have to be at the cutting edge of trying to improve it and to innovate and make it better. And if you think the status quo is going to be great, that's not respecting and valuing and taking responsibility for something. And I think I know that is the approach you'll bring to the department. It certainly is my own perspective on the department as well. Just a very brief question. The Court of Appeals recently ruled that the smell of marijuana is not probable cause for a search. And I've heard you mention this briefly in various contexts. That really speaks to a concern that I've had. I feel that over-policing is an issue when it comes to marijuana. Can you just explain a little bit of how this will change the police practices?
So that particular court ruling is centered around a traffic stop. And the court ruling speaks to that an officer does not have the authority to search an individual, not the car, but cannot search the individual simply by the smell of marijuana coming from the car. So though that you pull someone over, for example, and there's a smell of marijuana coming out of the car, the court ruling basically stated that the officers searched the individual as a result of that traffic stop, and therefore that they did not have the right to search that individual. The court did say that the officer had the right to search the car, but not the individual person. So basically on what we call on that particular type of a stop. So with that being said, right, that we again, whenever there are court rulings that we are bound by, as relates to encounters with our citizens, whether it be via traffic stop or being a stop on the street, those are the types of things that we have to retrain our officers and inform them and how that would look differently based upon their actions from this point forward. Therefore, they can't go outside the boundaries of the law to do it any different kind of way. So we have to make sure that those bulletins are placed out, training bulletins, and make sure that we review that with the officers in an attempt to make sure that we understand that. So we understand, again, marijuana being the number one, quote, drug that we see most often, right? And it's been decriminalized. And, you know, citations, you know, if marijuana is, you know, present and before us, it's our duty to basically to seize that marijuana, as long as we do it lawfully, right? And if it's based upon Maryland law and, you know, in our conjunction and working with Mr. McCarthy at the state's attorney's office on the cases in which he, you know, will go forth with, again, and he has basically given us sort of some stringent type rules about how we actually, you know, whether he will treat a case criminally versus being it civil. And so civil citations, of course, are, you know, given to individuals, and they're just a civil fine like a parking ticket, and there's, you know, nothing else associated other than the fine if the court so rules. And, you know, that marijuana is seized and it's destroyed. And that's based on those premises. But, you know, outside of that, right, when we talk about the distribution of marijuana or, you know, possession with the intent to distribute, we will continue to actively investigate those cases. Because, again, unfortunately, and we've had this conversation before, and as I've noted, that it still troubles me. And I've worked in narcotics a long time during my career, but it still troubles me to see that over the past 5 years, all of our drug-related homicides have centered around, unfortunately, it's marijuana. It's baffling. It's unthinkable in many facets, but it's happening. And so we have to figure out, again, how do we get to a root cause to try to eliminate that part of it. But the reality is that I can't ignore that. But I see the impact that it has from a minor. When you look at, excuse me, the minor possession of marijuana, I see the impact that it has in many of our communities, and I understand that. And I don't want that to be our sole focus. From a patrol perspective, that we're just walking around neighborhoods looking to try to find people who have small amounts of marijuana. That's not what we're there for. That's not the mission. That's not what we're setting forth, and we need to change that dynamic, okay?
Thank you, Chief. Look forward to working with you.
Right, thank you.
Well, Acting Chief Jones, as you can see, there's a lot of interest and questions. There's a lot of care with regards to this appointment. I have to say that, you know, I volunteered to basically step up to be president this year, thinking that I would help with some of the transition. And this particular one was the one that I was hoping we would get to before my presidency was over, because we were supposed to start and get this done in June. But I'm so pleased that we are here, and I'm so pleased that we've had the opportunity to you know, to work with you in the past, and that we are able to today raise our hand and make a very important decision for the county. No doubt, public safety is central to everything that we do here in this county, and it protects our traditions. So after our public hearing, which will be at 1:30, we will vote on your confirmation, and really appreciate you making yourself available, not just for this interview, but anytime we call you on any issue. Really do appreciate your service and that of everybody who is here. Want to acknowledge that Chief Goldstein is also here today, and want to thank him also for his service. And so we'll be back here at 1:30. Thank you.
Thank you also very much. Thank you.
Okay, now we're on to item 5, which is action. This is confirmation of County Executive's appointment of Chief, Department of Police, Assistant Chief Marcus Jones. So, Assistant Chief, come over. All right, I'm going to turn over to the Chair of our Public Safety Committee, Council Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It is truly my honor and sincere pleasure to nominate Marcus Jones to be the next police chief of Montgomery County.
All right, Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I very happily second that motion.
And since we have had our share of conversation, I think that we can just go ahead and move forward with the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous. Congratulations. All right. All right. All right, people. So colleagues, with that extraordinary vote, and I think we're all so relieved. I think that we're going to adjourn, and we'll be back this evening for public hearing. Thank you so much.